Our next presentation is developing a brief manual for supervisors to guide tertiary students, undergraduate and beyond. It will be delivered by Mr. Cristian from the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He will be presenting on behalf of his international inter-institutional team that includes Ms. R.L.D.Kan, Dr. Benson Lau, and Dr. Georg-Kranz. Mr. Giron is currently involved in multiple projects related to the therapeutic and transdiagnostic effects of non-invasive brain stimulation at PolyU. He also assists in supervising capstone students who are conducting their first systematic review. Mr. Giron, please.
Hi, thank you very much. And thank you, Sweta, for the invitation. Let me just share my screen, sorry. Sorry, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. I forgot to set some privacy settings. I'll be back on this chat in a minute. I just need to leave it and change my settings. I'll be back in less than a minute. Sorry.
Okay, take your time.
Please take your time.
Sorry, hi. Is this
we can see your screen, your slides now. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, I'm Mr. C.G.Giron. I'm a research associate at the Polytechnic University in the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences. I'm working under Dr. Georg-Kranz, who is an assistant professor. In our lab, our research is usually related to the neuroscience of mood disorders, for example, depression, and interventions. We also have teaching responsibilities, such as working with capstone students. This presentation is related to our efforts in our department to prepare a curriculum or guidelines for supervisory staff to guide undergraduate students through a high quality, clinically relevant systematic review. So I'm sure you're all familiar with capstone projects. These are projects given to students as a requirement to fulfill their degree expectations. In our case, we had 5 undergraduate students who were in the fields of clinical and healthcare, I think occupational therapy and physical therapy. And their expectations are just to complete a project with a research component and some kind of data collection. In our lab, we expect the students to do something experimental, such as seeing the effects of brain stimulation on some activity. But as you're all, I'm sure, are familiar, at the beginning of this year, there were COVID restrictions, which were pretty abrupt, which limited any interactive or face-to-face projects. So because we wanted to we wanted the students to do something that was clinically relevant, we decided to discuss with them and start a systematic review. This is different from a literature review that's usually narrative or an overview of some research question. Systematic reviews are usually more demanding as far as like what the students need to report in the methods and their data analysis. These are high quality synthesis, knowledge synthesis. They're considered great evidence for clinicians to use for their treatment decision-making or policy guidance. For our students, we believed it provided a good practical research experience. They were interested in clinical background, which was taken away with the COVID restrictions, but with a systematic review, we thought it can provide them something that approximates clinical work. We all working on systematic also fosters skills for them to read, use, and conduct their own research. And if done well, especially if the students are motivated enough, a systematic review can be published, no matter what the findings are. Because for these kind of reviews, what matters is the methods, which is something the supervisors can provide. However, these kind of projects, they tend to be very esoteric, which means very few people are aware of the best of the best methods to satisfy what defines a systematic review. This is true even for PhD students who are sometimes, I mean, they're very competent, but they're still new and they're not aware of what's considered the best choice. In our lab, we use the Prisma 2020 checklist to define what a systematic review is. And the reason is very simple. This Prisma statement is typically named by high-ranking journals for authors to satisfy in order for them to be published. Again, many of the items, this is only a quarter of the items. The list is actually quite long, but the items are even though they're stated clearly, it can be quite esoteric as to what satisfies the item. For example, I mean, synthesis methods is quite clear, but the quality of the assessment, the risk of bias, heterogeneity, each of these requirements, they have their own tool set. They have many options that technically satisfies them, but may not be the method that gets your paper published or accepted. So that's what we were hoping to work on, is to provide a manual or a pipeline of the best methods that increases the chances of your review getting published, but also it helps the students kind of learn skills that can actually benefit their applications, their CVs, and so on. So even though this kind of systematic curriculum, it might be kind of constraining, it's also a great basis for a pipeline or a manual to kind of focus our students to learn specific skill sets. You can imagine that if the students are asked to simply just find a way to assess the quality of the studies included or risks of bias, then they might see many options if they just Google it, which is not good. There's this concept in psychology where if you give someone too many options, they end up not choosing the best. They just choose what's the first one they see or the most convenient, which doesn't improve their chances of publishing, and also doesn't improve their skill set that they develop. So I was given an opportunity to co-supervise a group of students. I chose to start them on a systematic scoping review because of time issues. And also the statistics involved are usually simpler, so I thought this was better for the students. But it's also still rigorous. So I'll give a brief kind of overview of what, after discussing with my supervisor and collaborators, what are the best techniques to start our students? Like what is a pipeline we can develop for students who are doing their first systematic review? Just the first early steps for preparing their search. We solidify the research question by asking them to prepare a form of questions in a form of a PICO statement, which is just PICO stands for patient, intervention, comparison, and outcome. So it's several items the students need to write up a sentence for to describe what their research is, what the review is about. Thank you, Mabel. So they also work for, we also had a form for them, questionnaires to focus on their key terms. PolyU has a great class that the students are referred to complete. And then the students were also given, we also prepared a form for their data charter, or sometimes referred to as a data extraction, after they completed the key terms tutorials. During the screening, during the actual search, we advised the students to split into teams, two teams to do the search independently, while reminding themselves of their PICO statement. We gave them tutorials on how to use EndNote and specifically how to use the file organization on EndNote so that it conforms with the Prisma requirements. That way, it keeps things very simple for them. And then, of course, we also had a third member, or I think it was a fifth student, to be the scribe, essentially, to always write down their job was to just write down any limitations their team confronted, or anything the team did to solve some problems. So it just makes their manuscript more transparent, which also abides by the Prisma standard. Another component of our manual was that for any uncertainties or any questions the students might have, we always ask them just kind of consolidate them, and then we would have a meeting with the supervisors and myself and all the students, which would be very colloquial. We would always take their input and ideas serious, so that they experienced a very professional and clinically relevant. They experience clinically relevant exposure of what the job they might have in the future. In any case, the overall goal of this pipeline or manual or curriculum is to simplify the problem of this systematic review, which has many requirements, which must be completed in a year. And we wanted to help the students kind of focus it into into several simple problems that they need to just focus on. And of course, as the guide, as the supervisors, we would guide them through it to make sure they safely and successfully completed this review. Some pitfalls in it. So we're still developing this. I just met my team last week to discuss some analysis for their data. So it's still in progress. But some of the pitfalls and limitations we've experienced thus far are the students' comprehension. It seems to ebb and flow, which means that 1 week they seem to have a full understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it, but then a month later in a meeting, they forgot why. And so it's very important, something we've noticed, that to ask them to write as much possible down, at least on a shared document. Statistics is a very common limitation, not just for undergrads, for PhD students as well. For even the most successful psychiatrists, their statistics seem to be very limited. So the only solution for that was to have a cheat sheet of the most relevant statistical analysis that they need for common review data. And then scheduling, students usually are not available at the times that we're available, so we just got around it by trying to be as flexible as possible. Future directions for this curriculum we're working on is to expand it. We're working with collaborators to sort of have a list of the best methods for the requirements of Prisma. And the reason why we're doing this is so that we can share this summary with PhD students or RAs like myself, so that when they're asked to supervise students like this, it can be the probability of success is very high. And our definition of success is that the students publish their work. That's it for me. Here's just a reference for the Prisma guidelines that I used for my students. Yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Cristian. So do we have any questions for Cristian?
Cristian, thank you so much for doing this for us, for sharing your kind of approach to helping students with their capstone projects. Just a very simple question to start the discussion. What is a scoping review? Here we are also helping students with their literature reviews. Perhaps we can also look into scoping reviews. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's essentially you're trying to see, it's a review, right? Where you summarize a bunch of studies that you search on the database, but the difference is that a scoping review, you're just characterizing what the literature looks like. So usually the research question is very new. It's completely new, and you expect to find a very little number of studies that investigated the research question. So a scoping review if you do it systematically, it's very useful, especially in a clinical setting. You want to see how an intervention has been used and how many times it's been tested and where. You're just characterizing. You're reporting percentages, the dates that different papers have been taken, and the quality of these papers. It's simpler than, for example, a meta-analysis, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Cristian, when you put them in groups or in pairs, did you encounter any issues with grouping, or were they working on the same topic?
No, they're very, my group is very smart. They're so easy to work with. As soon as I told them what we need 2 independent groups and 1 writer, they immediately knew how to group themselves. I think they were friends. They're 5 girls who got along really well. So as soon as I mentioned it, they just looked at each other and knew who would do what. So I think I'm lucky in that regard. A lot of the steps have been easy because the students want this to work.
Just one more question. You mentioned that your ultimate aim is to really help students publish. So what's your timeline on this? Have you put anything into publication yet, or anything under review yet?
No, the timeline looks great. We still have, I think, 6 months, and the students have finished screening and they finished a lot of usually the time-consuming parts. I think they screened, when they did their search, they found 3,000 studies, like 3,103, and only 16 were relevant. It's like less than 0.5%. So they finished it. That's usually the most time-consuming part, and working together, they finished it. So we still have time. Right now, they're doing their analysis, and it looks well. I'm confident if they complete their analysis, they can publish. The writing is great too, so I think it's kind of fast track.
Thank you, Cristian. Thank you very much.
Thank you.